I'd like to have the panelists come out so we can start the conversation. Welcome. So why don't we all introduce ourselves? David, we'll start with you and then we'll go down the road.
My name is David Kalt. I'm the founder and CEO of Reverb.com. We're a marketplace for musicians to buy, sell, and play.
Sounds like all musicians. Probably that's the point. So I'm Sean Chapp. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders for Catalytic. We make a platform that helps companies streamline their business processes through better people management, automation, and providing total transparency.
My name is Stu Grubbs. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Lightstream, which is a live streaming broadcast studio in the cloud. If you think Google Docs for live video production, you've probably all heard of Facebook Live, YouTube, which we're actually broadcasting Techweek today on. While all these distribution platforms like Twitch launched, there were no better tools for the creators themselves, so that's what we set out to build.
Cool, we're on YouTube. I didn't know. It's awesome. Hey, my name is John Higginson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Innova. We're a fintech company here in the city. We do consumer and business lending to a wide variety of people across the US, UK, and Brazil. And we also license our technology under a brand called Innova Decisions.
Thanks, Chris. My name is Rishi Arora. I'm head of engineering at Strike Social. We are developing a next-generation platform to enable programmatic media buying for social media advertising for our brands and advertisers.
Great. So our panel's about elite talent. So figured we start the question about hiring elite talent. A lot of talk in our business in the tech space about having 10x engineers or 1,000x engineers. So, how critical is it to have absolute elite engineering talent versus hiring very strong talent that you can develop within the right organization? So, Rishi, if we can start with you and then work back this way.
Yeah, in my experience, building a large-scale software system, a SaaS platform, a website, an e-commerce platform, it's always such a large effort that not having a team that works together collaboratively is generally not an option. You have to have a team of people who understand each other, that have got each other's backs, and they help each other out when things break, and they kind of complement each other instead of like working against each other. But having said that, we all know that there's always this 1 or 2 10xers that are all out there that are willing to do like 50% of all the work in the entire team, and they do it and they shine at it. However, what I'd like to add is that people like that, what makes them the most successful is when they are true mentors for the rest of their team and not just individual contributors. When you're a mentor, not only are you contributing at the 10x level that you are capable of, but you're making other 10xers happen. And without that, you can't replicate yourself, and the process just kind of stops if you don't impart your knowledge to others and help each other out.
Yep, I think you wind up needing both. I think you definitely need people who are very smart, that are going to think radically different about how you're going to solve a problem or how things have been built that are going to challenge the status quo. And you need people who are also very talented, who can also deliver and work together, as Rishi said, collaboratively and really form part of the team. The people that are the geniuses that we talk about, they do have to work within the team. And we talk a lot sometimes in tech about the brilliant asshole, right? So we got this guy, we got this person, they're a brilliant asshole. But keep in mind that both of those words are true, right? They might be brilliant, and I can confidently say that we have a lot of brilliant people at Innova, but we don't have any assholes. And that's a very conscious choice, because they do ultimately have to come back and work with the team to deliver those solutions. It isn't just about having great ideas and being apart from everyone else.
We built a collaborative video studio in the cloud, and when we started, we got told that it wouldn't be possible, and by a number of people experienced in the business. And I was lucky enough to start with elite talent being my co-founder. He's not terribly an asshole, but he is brilliant. No, we get along swimmingly, and it's the same policy we had when hiring multiple other brilliant people on our team. We found people that were incredibly intelligent and experienced in what we were building, that knew how to take separate technologies and hook them together in a very unique way to accomplish something that multiple mentors had told us not to even attempt. And 3 years later, it works, and it works better than any of our competitors. But that took collaboration and being a genius. So I agree with you. I don't think you ever have to hire that person. That's a combination of those two words. I think you can find brilliant and collaborative people that do sometimes have to work alone. Just briefly, while they come up with a new concept. But then once they bring it to the team and they teach each other, some really, really cool things start to happen.
Yeah, I guess I think of it as largely a composition of teams. So, do you need to have a 10X person? Is it helpful if you have one? Great. I don't know that any team absolutely needs it, depending on your domain. I mean, we write business software, so it is not the most complex from an algorithmic perspective. I'd rather have people who can really. The tough parts of business software a lot of times are when you're in the trenches and you're just trying to work through a problem that's maybe not hard to figure out, but hard to figure out what the problem itself is, and you need committed resources who are really going to work through well under heavy time pressure. And to me, that's actually one of the hardest parts of business software. So having that 10X programmer who can't participate in that, I'd rather walk past the 10X programmer and really have a team that can kind of make it through the hardest parts of business software. Other than that, it's like the term itself actually really annoys me because it's just an insulting term. I mean, I could also get a 10X programmer by getting 1/10 other engineers and just end up with an average programmer. So it's just like a horrible term and concept. I actually dislike it a lot.
That's a good point.
I've been doing this for a while, and what I see in the term 10X, and I do use that annoying term occasionally, is less of the brilliance, more of the decisiveness, pragmatism, being able to be a solid engineer and be able to solve problems, be able to collaborate, but be able to not constantly be so in the code that you're not willing to mentor others and actually make decisions. So to me, separating a 1X from a 10X is decisiveness and pragmatism in terms of getting shit done. And I think we need more engineers that can get shit done.
This question definitely, we're real now.
Yeah, we have no opinions on 10X.
So let's talk a little bit about attraction. Which recruiting tactics or strategies have been successful for targeting top talent for your organizations? And where have you struggled a little bit, or where have you faced some challenges? David, if we could start with you.
Yeah, honestly, I in my prior company didn't have an in-house recruiter, and I know I spent a lot of my tech team's resources interviewing and doing a lot of the filtering process. The moment we hired a recruiter and a people person who's in this room right now, our recruiting efforts changed dramatically. She's been able to really hone in on the skills and the culture that Reverb's all about, and finding the right fit, because all engineers, just like any other profession, they're not all equal, and everyone looks for something different in terms of what they're looking for in their career, what they're looking to develop, and we want to find perfect fits. We don't just want to find people that check boxes. Having someone on your team who's spending the effort really understanding your culture and understanding what the inputs that can make a difference are has been critical to us.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but in my previous company, we also went through that, where we didn't want to have a recruiter because we wanted the engineers to be really close to all the people that they would talk to. But I think at Catalytic, we do have a recruiting function, and it actually does. It makes a big difference. I mean, I will say. I think having a really tight process has been very helpful for us, finding kind of an authentic voice and being able to explain to engineers who we are as a company, being able to find people who are really aligned with our mission has really been important. So when we talk to candidates, when we look at engineers, we look for obviously horsepower. We do want people who are really smart. But is someone Is someone heckling me? Like passively heckling me here? No, I'm just kidding. We look for, we obviously want horsepower, but we also want people who believe in what we do. We want people who are excited about what we do, and we also think we're unique in that we kind of offer up really cutting edge technology within business software, that we're doing some cool stuff. So really we just try to sell what we do and get people who are really excited by it. And then from our perspective, we want to make sure that we're really excited about that team, that we know, when this person joins, it's going to raise the average of the team, and we're really just going to be excited, and we're going to learn from that resource. And it doesn't mean we have to hire everyone who's always experienced. I mean, we bring in people who are relatively inexperienced as well, but they bring a different perspective, or they bring a different tech, or they bring kind of a different level of enthusiasm. So there's something that everyone's adding to the team.
Yeah, I was going to add to, we have an internal recruiting team, which is awesome and has been really effective at bringing people into the organization. But even before that, we find our best advocates are people on the engineering team to start with, that for their friends, for the people that they went to college with, that they used to work with, that they meet elsewhere, that them being able to talk about Innova and what we do and our culture is really one of the prime ways in which we bring people in the door.
Yeah, I think a solid recruiting program begins with a solid job description that sets the stage for not only what your team wants and also what your recruiter is looking for. Having a job description makes it clear to a candidate looking for a job what it is you're looking for. It is actually a means of you telling the candidates, potential candidates, what your culture is all about. It's your marketing, essentially. You're marketing your engineering team. So for example, in our jobs page on our website, you wouldn't see words like wanted 10 years of Java coding experience. What you will see is apply here if you've done some cool project on an Android app, or apply for a job here if you've dealt with some new technologies like Elixir and Golang and Node.js. So what we look for is subjective qualities in engineers, and not necessarily like how much time they've spent working with a certain tool in the past. And in terms of recruiting, we pay a lot of emphasis on getting to know the person during the interview process. We take our candidates out to lunch to kind of loosen them up and kind of get them talking on a more personal level, get to understand them. We ask them questions like, teach me something you've learned in the last year. So it kind of speaks to what I was referring to earlier about mentorship. How good is this person in trying to teach a stranger when the stranger is trying to be very dismissive and very not interested, and this candidate now is struggling hard to show how good of a mentor he or she can be. So that's kind of what we focused on, having a very solid interview process and a very clear job description that sets the stage for what we offer to our employees.
So you've all mentioned some aspect of an internal recruiting team, whether they're actual recruiters or what I call the extended recruiting team, so engineers who are serving in the role of recruiting. So what's the optimal time for a company to get an internal recruiter, so someone not on the engineering team, and what training do you provide your engineers to recruit?
Yeah, so Innova is a much bigger company, but I would say early on the evolution is somebody is doing recruiting anyway, right? Even the hiring manager is doing some of that recruiting, and then when you get to a certain scale, you have a dedicated person. It doesn't mean you'll never use outside firms again. You probably will, because you'll have jobs that are unique, or you'll need to connect to a group of people that you may not have connections to, but you'll have that. But having that focus, it's like anything else. Having somebody whose job it is, who owns that, is really powerful. But the team then has to be engaged in that too. And we have 35 of our engineers who are actually part of our interview process. So we trade off people doing things like code writing and problem solving and behavioral interviews. And they go through training as well about what to ask and how to think about it and how to talk about the team and the company. And by the way, I interview everybody as well. And it's something that I've done in all the CTO jobs that I've had, because I think figuring out who's the right person for the team is certainly among the top 1 decisions I might make on a given day.
We're an incredibly small team, so I've turned everyone on my team into a recruiter. We're 14 people, and I think every member of that team knows what we're about and what we're setting out to do. And so at this phase of our company, it makes more sense to evaluate on would this person fit into our baker's dozen worth of people. And then in the future, we've looked at recruiters in the past. I think it's something that we'll evaluate more when we approach 30 to 50 people. But at this time, I think it's incredibly important that the whole team acts as a recruiter. Look back at the people that you respected at previous organizations. I think somebody said it already, and that's really what is a big part of our process. And I interview everyone as well, just as a final, making sure this person's a good egg. But otherwise, it's really the responsibility of the whole team on who we're going to work with for the next 5, 10 years.
Makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about Chicago. So I imagine you all have a mix of hiring needs and different roles, and some of these roles and needs are harder to fill than others. Are you finding the right mix of talent from Chicago to meet your recruiting needs? What's been effective in attracting people who live outside of Chicago to come and start their life here?
We've had no problem attracting good talent in Chicago. I feel that Chicago is such a global international city that there are lots of people that are moving here for, let's say, spouse reasons or academic reasons. So I don't feel that it's a hard sell to get good engineers into Chicago, and I feel that there's a really, really good pool of engineers. You have to be willing to develop talent as well. So I am not so focused on trying to recruit talent from the coasts. I'm way more focused on trying to develop talent. I've got a really good, solid team of senior engineers and leaders that will give us a platform that we can really develop junior engineers, sort of in the mold that we think is gonna sort of give us the results that we need. And that's where I'm very committed to Chicago. Chicago has such a gritty atmosphere that the young talent that we bring in, they aspire to work hard. They've got great dedication, extremely motivated. And I'm a big fan of Midwestern values. Built multiple companies in Chicago, and I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for just the work ethic and the desire to succeed here.
John?
Yeah, no, I totally agree on the investing in resources here in Chicago. I mean, that was a very conscious decision that we had made at my previous company, where we at one point said, you know what, we really have to look at our internal resources, and we have to make a commitment to actually have a path for people so that we bring them in as junior resources and really develop and invest in them. I think that's also a good way to retain talent too, so we end up, over time with people who are much more loyal to us, which is great. In terms of attracting people from the coast, though, I think we've actually been pretty effective. We've gotten a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, I mean, it's all relative, but we've definitely had a few people take a look at what we do, and they feel, I feel like one of the things that engineers really look for is there an interesting problem to solve? And if you have an interesting problem to solve, and they think that you have a good team that they're going to learn from in solving it, and they think you have good investors who are going to back you over a long period of time, I think that a lot of engineers are pretty flexible about where they ultimately end up. Silicon Valley has the advantage of people are willing to take higher risk, because if it fails, they feel like they can just walk down the block and get a new job, which is probably true. But at the same time, in Chicago, we could just pull up Zillow and be like, hey, you're paying this for your Palo Alto home, and you could buy a mansion here in Chicago for half that price. So there are definitely a lot of advantages for Chicago, and I think it's just a matter of giving them an interesting problem. I mean, that's what engineers, I think, ultimately want. They want an intellectual challenge.
John?
Yeah, I agree too. We've had no problem finding people in Chicago, and having spent my entire career here, and I've actually seen the evolution from when everybody looked at Chicago as a waypoint on their way to Boston, New York, or San Francisco, and that's definitely changed in the last decade. I think Chicago we've done a much better job of talking about the tech community here. I think for a long time we had a little bit of that Midwestern humility where we didn't talk about the successes and the great companies that were being built and run here. And I think we've gotten much better about that. And that's been a part of having the people here in the city to recruit. But we've had no problem recruiting from people within the city. In terms of attracting people, I agree. I think it just comes back to its purpose, right? People want to do great work. They want to feel like they can grow as an individual. And that's particularly true about technology people. That's why I think all of us got into this profession, is because we're at our core curious, want to see what the new thing is. We want to help build the new thing. And I think being able to sell that, to be able to convey that message, is the most powerful way to get people to come here. And the fact that they don't have to share a room with 8 other people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, what other industry do you have where, like, everything you knew 3 years ago is no longer relevant today? Right. You know, that's like, that's tech, right?
Yeah. And Chris, may I add to that?
Please go ahead.
So one thing I've noticed is that the talent pool can sometimes feel a little bit too restrictive, because sometimes engineers are just not willing to kind of take the leap of faith to go outside their comfort zones in which they work. For example, I've known a number of people who worked in healthcare, and there's just like, my whole career is healthcare. They might go from one company to another during the career, but they'll just never want to change. But like Sean, you mentioned, and like you as well mentioned, John, that engineers at the core, they're curious, they want to problem solve. That's their core skill set, not the industry that they work on. So as recruiters, if you encourage good talent to go look outside of the industries that they're working on, you know, high frequency trading, people may jump to other industries like advertising. One of our data scientists, he's a particle physicist. So I think the talent pool can actually be a lot larger than what it is if we encourage people to take the leap of faith and move outside.
One of our engineers that we hired here in Chicago joined us from Etsy, had never made video or done anything with video ever. And he rebuilt our ingest servers in his first month. So I think that, I mean, and one of the things he said during his interview process is, he goes, do you have hard problems? I said, the worst. And he goes, do you have great people? I said, the best. And he goes, okay, I'll put in my resignation tomorrow. I said, I didn't hire you yet. He goes, I know, I'll see you on Tuesday. And he's been with us ever since, and he's a phenomenal individual that's added a tremendous amount to our team, and we found him here in Chicago, part of a hackers group. So
Very cool. So let's talk about diversity. This is definitely a topic that comes up a lot in just recruiting tech talent, especially recruiting elite tech talent. You know, how does your organization think about building a diverse team? And then as a broader community, what should we be doing to better attract diverse talent? John, why don't we start with you?
I just want to start with pointing out, before anyone else does on our behalf, that there are no women on this panel. I noticed that coming out. We're all a little bit ashamed about that. So, but wait, who were you directing the question? Not at me, right, John?
John Higginson.
Yeah, look no further than evidence that there's a problem in our industry than an all-male panel, right? So I'll give you diversity. So first of all, diversity is really important to Innova. It's actually one of our core goals as a tech team. It's something we talk about all the time as something we're focused on. And I'll give you 3 arguments why. So the first argument is, we'll call it the elite argument. If you only ever recruit and only ever add to the team from people who come from the same backgrounds, the same experiences, the same education, the same gender, you're going to get the same answers. And you can't do that if you're trying to build new things. The second argument I'll give you is the bottom line argument. Now, none of us up here, I would venture to say, would tell you that it is easy, or we have so many candidates for all of our technical roles that we just don't know what to do with them, right? That is a long-standing problem in our industry, is that there are way more jobs. As technology, as Mark Andreessen says, software is eating the world. As that happens, there are more jobs than there are people to fill them. So why are we only looking at a third of the population to fill them, right? So that's the bottom line argument about diversity. And the third is, it's just the right thing to do, right? We ultimately, as companies, we have an obligation back to our customers and society as a whole. So what are we doing about that? Well, first of all, we work really hard to broaden the candidate pool coming in. That means that all of our job descriptions and all of our postings have been reviewed through software to make sure we don't have gendered language in there, to make sure that we're not unintentionally discriminating in the application process. We make sure that we look at a broad range of backgrounds. We have an apprentice program that brings people in from non-tech careers and train them to be software engineers and join the team. And we work very hard culturally to celebrate those differences and celebrate those uniquenesses. That it isn't just we're looking for the same person who went through the same CS program at the same university. It's that we have people from all different kinds of backgrounds, and that comes back into what we do at Innova. But this has been a core focus of my work in the tech community, and it's absolutely a core goal of what we do as a tech team.
Rishi.
Yeah, specifically speaking about gender diversity, because that is one of the core subjects of this argument. I think trying to make women feel more comfortable in the workplace, it starts with looking at the small things like microaggressions that happen at work and stop them in their tracks. As an instance, last year I overheard somebody say, "Hey, when is that chick going to review my code? Where is she at?" And I know this person, he's professional, I've known him for more than 10 years, so I kind of knew that he didn't mean any harm. But microaggressions like these, even though they are seemingly harmless and well-intended, you should take the leap of faith and try to find out what the other person might take them as. So when these things happen, we as leaders, it's upon us to watch them when they happen and stop them right there, even though they seem harmless, right? Chick, what kind of word is it? It's just a word, right? It's like bro, dude, whatever, But you have to understand that it may be taken very much the opposite way in which it's mentioned. So you got to stop it when it happens.
Stu.
I just wanted to mention that if you aren't familiar with a group called Women Who Code, they are relaunching their Chicago chapter coming up very soon, and I will be first in line before you guys to take as many engineers as I can get. But please look up that organization. They'll be throwing their relaunch here very soon, and be as supportive as possible. It's tonight? Perfect. Thanks.
And so what should we be doing as a broader community?
I mean, I would go back to the developing talent. I mean, if we all can agree that we don't have enough diverse candidates for the senior level roles, then we need to make openings at the junior level roles and develop the future talent that's going to be here, because it's not magically going to come out of the universities. It's not magically going to come from the dev boot camps. It has to come from within our organizations. So we're very committed to hiring roles and being a little bit more liberal on skill set, hiring for attitude in a more diverse role for our more junior roles. And we know those are going to be senior engineers in a very short period. I'm very optimistic about that, and I think it's something we can all do a little bit more of.
I think we have to invest back in the community too. We have a women in technology group that, in addition to doing things inside the company, also now the second year in a row is hosting an event for women in the Chicago tech community to come and hear speakers and network and meet other people. I'm involved in a group called ARA, which is here in the city, which is Attract, Retain, Advance, which is all about helping women grow into more senior leadership positions in technology. I think that's part of our obligation too, is we, as companies, we have to be willing to invest back in the community, because we'll see the return from that.
So let's talk a little bit about management and organization. There are a lot of competing theories or best practices on the best way to structure technical teams. There's agile, pair programming. What have you found works very well in your organization? And is there an org structure or development process that really has had an impact on your ability to recruit or retain talent? So Stu, if we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from a smaller team perspective, but in our experience, we have a number of members of our team who are extremely talented and need the freedom to both work independently, but then sometimes be able to come together and work as a group. It's a much more free-flowing methodology, and I think large organizations have to solidify something a little bit more solid, especially as you're adding more and more people to the team. But for us, if I didn't give people on our team the freedom to explore and to break things and we are pushing code to production on a daily basis, and sometimes without the test to prevent them from breaking things. But it's extremely important when building something as complex as we are that these guys have the ability to iterate as fast as possible. So ours is a much more free-flow structure right now, and I have a feeling that my co-founder, our CTO, will probably change that in the near future as we continue to add engineers to the organization. But particularly when you have such immense talent, I think it's important to give them the room they need to breathe and explore different options, especially when building a complex product like ours.
Any thoughts from one of you from a larger organization? Maybe you could talk about the evolution.
Sure. Innova grew fairly rapidly, and when I joined 3 years ago, the engineering team was, I think, about 70 people. Today, it's 135. So it's grown a lot. And one of the things that we talk about is some of the things that worked when we were smaller don't work when you can't fit everyone in a conference room. But the thing we've always anchored ourselves to is that about local decision making, that even though the engineering team is big, it's broken up into smaller teams, and we use Agile. But I actually think the methodology is not as important as the spirit behind it, which is it's a small team that works with somebody on the business side as a stakeholder, and they can make lots and lots of local decisions. They don't have to wait for somebody, a director in the organization or me to say, you can do this, you can't do this. It's like, here's the framework, here's the tool set. Now go and build stuff and decide what's right for your product and the goals that you have as an individual team to do it. And I think that's the secret, because I've seen teams that get really big and then become really bureaucratic, and that's bad. And that's bad both in terms of from a business delivery standpoint, but it's really bad in terms of a retention and a recruiting standpoint, because again, engineers are curious, they want to build things, they want to grow. If they become cogs in this giant mechanism, they don't want to stay.
And Sean Chow.
Yeah, no, I think, I've seen kind of an interesting scale. I mean, from when it was, like one coder all the way to when we had like 200 some coders working offshore in 3 different locations. It's tough. I don't think there's a right answer. I mean, even having gone through that at Catalytic, we struggle with finding the right cadence and finding the right balance and hitting that right balance between the autonomy that you want to give to your talented developers, but kind of predictability that you want to be able to have as a management team or as a selling team. And this may be unique in business software where, maybe some of this is informed by the constraints that you have as a company. When you're selling business software and you're selling into businesses, you can't just randomly release stuff into the environment. I mean, you could, but ultimately your software, your customers have to be ready for it. So there's the change management aspect. And so what that ends up doing is, I know they need X amount of time, and we have to back up a little bit and say, okay, if they need that amount of time, that means we need to be able to tell them about things, and then we need to give them a test environment. So it ends up having kind of this rippling effect depending on what type of technology you're creating. So ours may be different than everyone else's. Not being B2C, I imagine B2C would be a very different kind of environment. But unfortunately, I don't think there's a magic bullet. I think it just varies a lot depending on who you have, what you're trying to accomplish. I focus a lot on predictability. Like that to me is one of the most important things. How do we actually arrive at predictability?
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about insourcing versus outsourcing. So this is a question we certainly get from our portfolio companies, and we've seen many organizations do both successfully. How do you think about the trade-off between the two, and what advice do you have? Stu?
We've used a mix of both. I think we've found insourcing to be best for any of the complex projects that we approach, particularly when collaboration is needed between our most senior engineers to achieve something that otherwise couldn't be done. Where we've used outsourcing successfully, I think, is when we've had products that exist on their own in a sort of extension of our core product, and we've allowed that team autonomously to create that, with the appropriate linkage and all the things that are required there, but otherwise don't have to interface with our team much. We're able to design a technical and product spec, hand it over to them, let them work autonomously to deliver that and bring that back to our existing team for integration. But I think when you try to, at least in my experience, mix your internal team while trying to work with an external team on the same project, it often ends in miscommunication. That's not to say everyone who's full-time across different time zones can't do that, but when you have an outsourced organization, I find that there's some chaos introduced because of the differences in either culture, process, methodology, whatever it might be, that it's always best to take a particular aspect of the product and hand that over in its entirety and then receive that back for integration. So that's been our experience.
Yeah, those are definitely good points. Rishi?
Yeah, Mark Shore, our founder, is here. He founded our company 3.5 years ago. Outsourcing was something we did early on in our industry because we understood that as a managed service business, our client services team wants to service our clients on a 24-hour basis. So outsourcing for us was more of I want somebody awake 24 hours a day to manage my advertising campaigns. You can't possibly have that with everybody located in Chicago without doing like night shifts. So we went out to open offices in Krakow in Poland and Manila in Philippines. And even though initially that was mostly from an operational standpoint, we decided to use that footprint, the office footprint that we had, to expand our engineering tech presence as well in those locations. And it's been hugely successful, primarily because we focus a lot on communication. I think kind of contrary to what you said, Stu, we end up having teams that are co-located in both Chicago and Krakow. Both the counterparts in the same team work on the same project. We talk to each other like the 3 hours of overlap in time zones that we get. And the way it works really well for us is somebody's working on a piece of code during the day today, and when I go to sleep, someone wakes up in Krakow 4 hours later, they review my code. The next morning I come in, my code is already reviewed, and I can move on to the next task. But I think that doesn't come without the challenges that you kind of alluded to. It's very hard to make the communication happen like that. You have to be very patient. Culturally speaking, there are differences which you have to overcome. And those things begin with very small things like in the morning when we start the stand-up, the first thing Mark says is cześć. It's hello for Polish. So it just kind of breaks the ice. You know, you already know that you are, you don't treat them as outsiders. They are part of our team, and so you speak their language. In both metaphorically speaking and truly, literally speaking.
Yeah, I've seen that follow the sun model. We use the follow the sun model a little bit too. It's interesting because I think in theory it does what you're describing, and sometimes it works well, but I've also seen it break. And what ends up happening is you have one team that's basically destroyed the productivity of your next team in that model. So what ends up happening is there's a friction involved in when you have outsourcing. And you have to make sure that whatever your perceived benefits are, which is usually cost savings, that your cost savings are going to exceed the pretty large amount of friction that gets introduced when you have an outsourcing arrangement. So, yeah.
And obviously, I'm speaking from a much younger company where a lot of what we're doing right now is new product development, which I think is frustrating to do it the way you're talking about. But I think if you're talking about long-term iteration or maintenance or following the sun, that it can make a lot of sense to do it the way you're talking about. It's just two different phases of the company, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about employer branding. Employer branding has become more important in today's recruiting process. What are some of the things that you've seen or that you've done in the past to improve your company's hiring or recruiting brand? David, why don't we start with you?
We're in a good position now, but we weren't always in such a good position now. I mean, we're trying to sell culture. We're not trying. I mean, we are selling culture. We embody musicians, and a lot of people like music. A lot of people are not musicians. There's a cool factor to being part of this community, this sort of elite community of musicians and rock stars who are our customers, who use our platform. So we can inherently, and I also know there's a big correlation between musicians and coders. So we've kind of found this subsection of musicians that like to code or coders that like to be part of this music community. And we've done really, really well of honing in on that and creating an environment that's very conducive to that, so that they feel that maybe 10 or 15% of their non-engineering time is involved in helping the company, having impact on the company outside of just the core engineering aspect.
Just to add to that, I think we benefit a little bit from the same. A significant portion of live streaming today is in the gaming industry. So a lot of people get a chance to participate, even though they're not making video games. They get to play them or be around, video game players. There's also the, YouTubers are making a lot of money and Twitch streamers, and so it's an opportunity to, while not being a content creator, to provide tools for creation. And there's a very cool aspect that I think the whole team enjoys. Supporting that community and new forms of content creation and online learning and everything else that goes on between those two platforms.
Yeah, we try to do a lot externally as well. So, different, spreading the word on social media, just pictures of events that we're having. we do a fair number of charity events and people engage in the community that way. We also have a blog that the tech team does where people on the team write about either their team or technology they're working on or something that we've talked about doing. And all those things are powerful. It just helps get the word out there, and it helps create a kind of a public image of the company and particularly of the engineering team, that when candidates are thinking about their next role, it just forms part of that picture for them.
Sean?
Yeah, no, I think it is interesting because employer branding has become so important. When we started, my last company, we just kind of lucked out with where we were. We ended up with like a really good culture. I think it was just a combination of our own kind of personalities and commitment and some of our early hires. But what I find myself doing now is very consciously curating the people and the attitudes, and even going to people sometimes saying, that was just a little bit off key, because now we're really being conscientious of our internal people, how people feel, and that knowing that that's ultimately going to make its way out. I mean, and so for us, it's like authenticity. Like, how do we just let our brand be basically comprised of the people within the company? And then, so that makes my job largely about making sure that the people within the company are kind of acting in a way that we think the company should be acting. And it's not, my vision, it's really the people, and how are we collectively as a company thinking about ourselves.
So, we've kind of talked about culture. It's been embedded in most of the topics, but I want to explicitly talk about it. What does culture mean to you, and how do you create the right culture for top technical talent? David, why don't we start from you? And I definitely, this is a question I think we want to hear from all the panelists, so we'll just go along the row.
I mean, I'm a huge believer in culture, and one thing is I don't believe, and I have a master's in computer science. I used to write code. I don't believe in creating my engineering team as being the elite part of the company. I have 50 engineers. I have 50 amazing customer engagement people. I have 30 people in marketing. I really focus on making the engineers feel like they're impactful outside of their area and making the other people feel that they're building the software too. And when you can connect your engineering team outside of engineering, and you can actually get non-engineers to think like engineers and get engineers to think like marketers, like that's a really cool culture. We do a weekly stand-up meeting. We did it today, every Thursday, 11:30. We go down in the basement. It's really grungy and gritty down there. And we throw 3 people in the center, like Fight Club, and they have to present. They have to talk about whatever the hell they want to talk about. Hopefully it's related to their work, but doesn't need to be. And we connect the dots between what everyone in the company does and their impact on it. And to me, that's been the biggest impact on culture. And it makes the engineers want to be there, not just because of the engineering tasks, which is important as a brand to make sure they're motivated and challenged, but they want to be here because they're moving a needle and they feel that they're having impact on the business. And I tell you, in all my career, the best people you can hire are people that want to have impact. How you give them the opportunity to have impact is the challenge of leadership.
Sean?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's like great. We don't do the Fight Club thing though. Although I like that idea. Maybe we'll have to adopt that. Kind of ad hoc Fight Club / stand-up. The thing that I would add on to that is, so we do spend a lot of time talking about mission. We spend a lot of time kind of creating these cross-functional feats so that people don't feel like they're functioning in a silo, like, hey, that's not my problem, that's sales problem, or that's customer's problem. And those are always going to pop up, so you have to like proactively fight them down. The thing that I would add on then is that we also spend a fair amount of time talking about values, like what is an acceptable way to win, because we're not a win at any cost. We believe we're going to win, and we believe we're very mission focused, but there's a right way to win and there's a wrong way to win. And so we want to make it very clear what we think is the right way to win, and we'd rather forego a win than to win it the wrong way. And I think that's an aspect of culture that a lot of times kind of gets, overlooked. We don't think of culture as like our events that we do. We don't think of it as that. we do them, but that's not really the most important part of it.
David forgot the first rule about Fight Club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've forgotten this entire conversation.
But I mean, honestly, it's the only thing we hire on. We've been lucky enough to find an immense amount of talent because we've hired on that, but I've never seen a group of people that cared so much about the individuals that they're working with, both not just professionally, but personally. And I've seen that interaction across our team for the last 3 years. And I think you do the best work of your life when you immensely care about what you're building, but also care about the people you're working alongside. And we've just benefited from that immensely. So I think it's the number one thing we've focused on since Techstars when we founded the company. So
Great.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that's a huge part for us is that we really like that people bring their whole selves to work and that they spend time at events outside of work and talk about their hobbies and interests. And we have people who do everything from build drones to write children's stories on the team, and they're able to talk about that. And I think that's really important because they're people. They're not titles and roles and sitting in a chair and cranking out code. They're people and they're part of a team, and we're there to support one another and also to talk about what isn't working and how we change that. And the one thing I'd add on to that too that's important from a leadership standpoint is culture is also what you tolerate. So it's very important to have your leadership team and people on the team that are carriers of that culture, and when somebody goes astray of that or is not additive or is even toxic to it, that they help correct that. Because if you don't correct it, everybody assumes that's part of the culture too.
that's a really important point.
Rishi gets the last word for the panel.
So in a panel before us, somebody mentioned that Chicago is such a great community. Everybody helps each other out. That's the kind of culture what we do at Strike Social. It's not about ping pong balls or beer kegs and free food and all that, although those are great things. I love them all. But what we try to promote in our engineering organization and overall company-wide is that you come to work, you feel good because you're solving the problems that you've always dreamt of solving. You're solving it in a way that leadership is giving you the power to solve it. And you're solving it by helping each other out. You're watching other people struggle with something, you step in and help them out. So that's what we do. We echo Chicago's culture.
Well, thank you very much. We are out of time, so that concludes our panel time. And thank you very much.
Chris. Thank you, everyone.